Is this good to eat? Watch and see. I'm Shidalu.
Dalu, can United States make 10-year whiskey in 7 days? True?
That can't be called whiskey. But that does remind me of Kavalan whiskey in Elon. At first, nobody believed it, but Nanto Distillery and Kavalan whiskey both became world champions. That proved it could be done. Today, we're not talking about age. We're talking about what happens inside oak barrels.
Let's break it down. Why oak barrels? Why not stainless steel?
Well, stainless steel is too expensive, so no. Stainless steel really is expensive. But these days, in the food industry, there are better options, like an IBC tote. It's a plastic tank that holds about a ton. It's heat and corrosion resistant, great for storage, and lightweight. About $60 on Shopee. Cheap. But back then, there were no IBC totes. So why oak? There's only one reason. Oak doesn't leak. Oak actually belongs to the genus Quercus. A familiar example of this kind of wood is the oak barrel we're talking about. But actually, you've seen it before. For example, in that episode where we talked about pigs, Iberian pigs eat acorns. Acorns are the fruit of oak trees. They're rich in fat, so they make the meat taste better. Second, think about Ice Age, that ugly little guy running around collecting acorns. Those are oak fruits too. I bring that up to show how ancient this tree is. And also, this species is fascinating. Trees in the oak genus have structures like tyloses and medullary rays. Medullary rays are radial tissues that run between the heartwood and sapwood. And these tissues help move nutrients between the heartwood and sapwood side to side. Vertical transport relies on vascular bundles, basically the xylem. And once the xylem dies, its vessels get filled with tyloses. You can think of them as being like small little plugs, in a way, that block the vessels. A straw is a good analogy. Imagine the inside swelling up until it blocks the middle of the straw. So when it's made into a barrel, no matter how it's cut, it's less likely to let any liquid through osmosis and leak out of the barrel.
So, is extraction what oak barrels are for?
Yes and no. Oak casks contain compounds like vanillin and eugenol. Sounds fragrant, right? Once they're extracted, they give the spirit a hint of vanilla. As it matures, esterification also happens along with oxidation and more. Esterification gives. The spirit reveals lovely fruity notes. But one thing few people mention is oxidation. When a cask is filled with spirit, there isn't actually much air inside there. People say oak casks breathe, and that causes oxidation. But it's far less than what you might initially think. It's through what's called the angel's share. Once that frees up space in the barrel, you get much more oxidation. So what is the angel's share? It's actually a very romantic Scottish term. It means that once an oak cask is entirely filled with new make whiskey and left to mature, when they open it 2 or 3 years later to draw whiskey, they find there's less of it. It's simply evaporation. But they say the angels drank it, so it's the angel's share. And that's why it's called that. The more official term now is the angel tax. But in the US, they have another term besides the angel's share. There's also the devil's cut. They say that besides what the angels take away from the cask through evaporation, some whiskey also gets absorbed into the wood and never comes back. That's what they call the devil's cut. Even the devil gets his share and takes it away. Back in the Prohibition era, alcohol ban era, some people would use water or alcohol that's really cheap to rinse out used barrels that had previously held some very good whiskey. Then they used water, or cheap alcohol, to wash out the devil's cut. Then bottled it and sold it. Once you know a bit of whiskey history, I think you'll find it pretty fascinating to learn about. We can also talk about faster esterification, or faster oxidation, both of which help shape the final flavor of the whiskey itself. So it's not just about extraction. For example, early on, our first question that we asked was about those quick-aged whiskeys made in 7, 10, or 20 days. As for that, one theory is that they make good use of ultrasound. They stick an ultrasonic probe into the oak barrel. That ultrasonic probe speeds up esterification. When organic acids and alcohol come into contact, heat can speed things up, and ultrasound disrupts the interface, and that disruption makes the reaction go faster. Second, once the ultrasound is in there, it becomes a major energy source. It also heats the spirit, so the spirit warms up, and once it heats up, the reaction speeds up too. Ultrasound also agitates the liquid, so that thorough mixing also raises the chance of reaction, and molecular collisions, which speeds the reaction up. But it does have some drawbacks. For example, if we rely on ultrasound alone, some reactions simply can't happen at the very same time, or happen very slowly. Ultrasound only speeds up things, like esterification or extraction, but oxidation can't be sped up quickly. This way, it can also make alcohol evaporate faster. And you know what? In the whiskey world, ABV, alcohol by volume, is a key metric. It directly affects the body. The fuller a whiskey feels, the more closely it's tied to ABV. So when the ABV drops, it has a big impact on this kind of accelerated aging. I'm just saying this because what happens in an oak cask is far more complex than you think.
But that still doesn't explain why Kavalan does it so fast.
Total tangent, but Kavalan doesn't use the high-tech tricks I just mentioned, like ultrasonic aging. What it uses is actually very simple. First, Taiwan is really hot, and that heat was exactly why the world doubted it at first. Think about it. The first famous whiskey region, outside the traditional ones, was Japan. Japanese distilleries were originally built near Hokkaido, so they were aiming for Scotland's latitude. In other words, they believed only that kind of climate could make whiskey outside Scotland and still produce a very Scotch-style whiskey. But in Taiwan, we just don't have places that cold. You can't build a distillery on Hehuanshan or at Paiyun Maj on Yushan. That'd be too weird. So whether it's built in Ilan, or in Nantou, or at one of Taiwan's smaller distilleries, what's the advantage? It's the way heat speeds things up. Because of Taiwan's latitude, our climate is much warmer than Scotland's on average, and higher temperatures speed up chemical reactions. The effect is dramatic. In chemistry, it grows exponentially. In Scotland, the angel's share is 1 to 2% a year. Here, it's about 3 to 4 times that. Put simply, Taiwan's angels drink more.
Taiwan's angels are all heavy drinkers.
So the angel's share is higher. You can think of it as those interactions happening 3 to 4 times faster. That doesn't necessarily mean aging is 3 to 4 times faster, but it is definitely accelerated. And as a result, some flavors might take 12 years to develop in Scotland, but here in just 2 to 4 years. You can get similar notes, but our flavors don't develop exactly the same way as in Scotland. Or to put it another way, say there are 20 flavor notes that make up a 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. Maybe 5 or 6 of them can develop in Taiwan in just 3 or 4 years because of the heat. But some still need more time, and some may mature too quickly and ultimately throw the whiskey's taste and harmony out of proper balance. That's an issue Taiwanese whiskey, including Kavalan, has to face. So with Taiwanese whiskey, that award-winning Kavalan was bottled earlier than you might think. It was bottled once it had already reached a good early balance, and then it won awards. So Taiwan's real advantage is the heat. It's hotter than Scotland. Our angels drink more, so maturation happens faster.
Since reaction speed matters, wouldn't tiny barrels be faster?
That's a pretty smart question.
Thanks.
Oak casks actually come in many sizes. The biggest is probably the American Gorda cask. That cask, after whiskey maturation, is typically used for marrying casks together and letting them rest. So it's a storage cask. It's about 700 liters. Next might be a Madeira cask. It's around 650 liters. It's made of European oak. Blah, blah. I could keep going down to the quarter cask. A quarter cask is only about 125 liters. It's usually a bourbon or sherry cask that's been modified. Here's the idea. Think of it this way. Volume grows cubically, but the relevant surface area only grows quadratically. So the smaller the cask, the more oak surface it comes into contact with, which means the reactions tend to happen faster, and they're more likely to occur. So yes, smaller oak barrels can mature the flavor faster. That does have one pretty clear upside to it, but it also has a downside. And the downside is that oak barrels aren't cheap. With whiskey demand booming, everyone wants oak barrels. American oak only comes from the US, and bourbon barrels are limited. European oak takes a long time to grow, and on top of that, it has run into another problem. During World War II, in places like France and Spain, oak trees old enough to be used often ended up with bullets embedded in them.
Really?
Yeah. And those bullets were really long, about as long as this pen. In other words, they were aircraft, machine gun rounds, firmly embedded in the oak's structure. So when they make barrels, if they hit that section, they can't use it. I was half skeptical, but the whole thing is true. In other words, getting oak barrels costs far more than you'd think. So people started asking, could I use oak chips, oak blocks, or even oak powder to maximize surface contact and speed up the reaction? But just like the ultrasonic aging we mentioned earlier, it's still a somewhat unbalanced method. For example, if you use oak chips, the extraction of compounds speeds up very significantly, but esterification and oxidation can't be sped up. And then there's one more thing to consider we haven't covered with oak barrels. Besides barrel size, there's one more factor. What the oak barrel held before matters. For example, if an oak cask previously held port or sherry wine or bourbon whiskey, the wood will retain some of the previous liquor's flavor in the inner surface of the oak itself. Then, when we fill it with whiskey, the two start interacting and give the whiskey a truly great flavor profile. For example, preserved fruit, dried fruit, or pineapple. You might even get briny notes, or all kinds of other interesting flavors. All of that can show up in the whiskey. Take wine casks, which have been popular lately, especially sweet wine casks. These casks previously held wine, so when whiskey is filled into them, it tends to pick up an extra fruity aroma over time, or honeyed notes, making the whiskey taste better. A clear example would be Japan's Hibiki 17. It uses plum wine casks. That's because Suntory itself makes a barrel-aged plum liqueur, which is matured in oak casks. Once the plum liqueur is removed, those casks are then used for Hibiki 17. And that whiskey develops a distinct note. Sure enough, it won a world title. But honestly, Taiwan has some great ones too. Back in the Monopoly Bureau days in Taiwan, each local distillery was given a special mission. And among them, the one closest to the geographic center of Taiwan was Nantou. It was the easiest for transport, so Nantou Distillery took on the job of handling all the surplus fruit, turning it into brandy for storage. They've got various brandy casks. Fruit brandy casks, like guava casks. They have lychee casks, orange casks, and plum casks. Nantou Distillery has a famous one, a whiskey matured in plum casks. Orange casks have been really popular lately, but I really like guava casks.
So, how do they pull off a 12-year flavor? In just a week?
The conventional approach that's standard is what we just mentioned. Make the oak barrel smaller. I've tried oak barrels in 5-liter and 10-liter sizes. And since Taiwan is hot, if you put high-proof food-grade alcohol in there, in less than a month, the color is already close to a 12-year-old whiskey. So just raising the temperature a bit higher and increasing the surface area can speed maturation up a lot. The oak chips we mentioned earlier work the same way. Another way is to speed up the extraction. Because when spirit interacts with oak, especially during extraction, water matters. Some brandies are legally allowed to use water to pull flavor from the cask, then blend it back with the spirit. But whiskey can't do that. So what we can do is raise the ABV which speeds maturation up. Or else you can use heat. My little oak cask sat in a very hot little shed, but I ended up with a cask of wood-flavored booze. Here's the takeaway from what I found. Then, one of the coolest methods is ultrasound. Ultrasound carries a lot of energy. It can even be used for cleaning, which shows you how powerful it is. And within the context of spirit aging in general, besides the esterification I mentioned, it also helps the spirit move through the wood pores in an extremely quick manner. So extraction speeds up too. That's one. Next, another camp likes using pressure. That one is easy to understand. When we cook or stew meat, we use a pressure cooker, right? Some Japanese rice cookers are known for pressure. Philips, Tefal, and other brands also make electric pressure cookers. They can turn beef that used to need 8 hours into something flavorful in 30 minutes. That's what pressure can do. But I recently saw a video about this. It goes like this. It doesn't just apply pressure. It also pulls a vacuum. And apparently, it works very well. In just a few hours, it can give whiskey the color of one aged 6, 7, or even over 10 years. Think about the logic. When you pull a vacuum, the air inside the wood's cells gets pulled out very quickly. Once that's out, the whiskey gets a chance to move in and replace it. So the wood soaks up the spirit fast. That's the basic idea. But there's one problem to deal with. As I mentioned, under a vacuum, everything starts boiling quickly. So the alcohol also evaporates very fast. So it has to be done in a sealed space. And once it returns to normal pressure, the alcohol then condenses back into liquid completely. And the third is heat and light. That's easy to understand. As for heat, Kavalan uses it a lot. They directly heat the oak barrels. People were already doing this in the 19th century. They even had a clever warehouse method. They heated the warehouse in winter, which helped speed up barrel maturation and aging reactions. That makes sense too these days. When you go out for drinks, a lot of bartenders use sous vide rapid extraction. I've done it before too. Normally, whenever I make plum wine, I do the math. It usually goes from Qingming to mid-autumn. And over that span, it's about 4,500 hours. That gives you a pretty good plum wine. But if you use sous vide and heat it to 55 or 60 degrees, under vacuum, alcohol evaporates slowly. Using plums for sous vide, at around 45 hours, similar taste. The very last approach is just air exposure alone. It speeds up esterification, and oxidation itself also softens tannins. Like the angel's share once that frees up some space, the liquid surface can contact air, and that triggers oxidation. I recently visited Funny Distillery. When I dropped by, they shared their latest experimental batch, and it tasted amazing. It was first aged in oak casks for maybe 2 or 3 years. Then they used soaking and showering. For the showering part, they draw the spirit out. Then use something like a shower head to spray it back into the cask. That quickly boosts up the oxidation rate. Sounds interesting, right?
So does that mean we shouldn't obsess over the age?
On that point, I actually disagree with you. Even though we talked about a lot of near magical tech, the spirits that are made with these quick aging methods, it still falls just a little bit short. Maybe I just haven't had the really good ones yet. If you guys leave enough comments and subscribe enthusiastically, maybe we should crowdfund it and buy all those bottles from the US. Then taste them on camera.
How much do we need to raise?
Well, not too much. Please subscribe, please. Help us grow our subscribers so I can spend more time talking about, with more depth and more interesting topics.
Yeah, thanks everyone. This time's goal, 8,888.
Number 88,000. Let's do it.
Bye everyone. One more episode soon. This episode was just the starting point for what's inside an oak barrel. In the next episode, we'll talk about the people outside the barrel and how they make those choices. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.